In this video, we're going to learn how to determine if lines are parallel. So instead of given parallel lines and then using those to make conclusions about the different types of angles, we're going to do the opposite. So it's called the converse. We're going to be looking at, do we have congruent alternate interior angles? If we do, well then the lines must be parallel, because if the lines are parallel, then the alternate interior angles are congruent, and vice versa. So you can kind of see here the different reasons. If we have congruent alternate interior angles, the lines are parallel. Congruent alternate exterior angle, lines are parallel. Corresponding angles congruent, lines are parallel. And then just remember the SSI, or same side interior. If those are supplementary, then that means that the lines are parallel. So our goal down here is to determine if any of the lines are parallel. So the first thing I'm looking for really is those two lines being cut by a transversal. So when I look at this, I'm thinking, okay, well, here's the two lines, here's the transversal. If I can find a pair of either same side interior supplementary angles or congruent alternate interior, alternate exterior corresponding angles, then the lines must be parallel. So A and B, they look to be parallel, but again, you can't make any assumptions unless we know something about the angles. So I look at the two given angles. Those angles, where they're located, they're in the interior of the two lines on the same side of the transversal, so those are same side interior angles. If these are supplementary, well then I have supplementary same side interior angles, which make the lines parallel. So if we add those together, we end up with 180. I'm just going to write that off to the side here. So 143 plus 37, add those up, you get 180. So what that means is we have supplementary same side interior angles, which implies parallel lines. So since the same side interior angles are supplementary, that means the lines must be parallel. So that means A is parallel to B. So I can say that those two lines are parallel because of this reason. Look at the next example here. Again, here's my two lines. This would be my transversal. And if I have the two angles here, so this entire angle and this angle to look at, those angles are corresponding. They're in the same position. So if my corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines would have to be parallel. So what I need to do first is I need to see what's the measure of this entire angle. And if it equals 120, well then those are congruent. So if we add those up, 82 plus 40, that gives us 122. So 122 for this total angle, not congruent to the 120. So I'm doing two arcs for not congruent. So that means the lines are not parallel. So this would be no parallel lines. I'm just going to say none. And I'm going to just say because corresponding angles are not congruent. So the lines can only be parallel if the corresponding angles were congruent. And when you look at the picture, they look parallel to each other, but because those corresponding angles aren't congruent, no parallel lines. Let's try the next two here. So now we have a picture here where I see some different scenarios. I have these lines, and I have this, which could be a transversal. So if I look at the angles that are given, so focusing on just this piece, I have 115 and 70. So 115 plus 70 equals 185. So those are not, even though they're same side interior, they're not supplementary. So that means N and O are not going to be parallel to each other. Then I'm going to move on. I'm not going to write all this out just because there's so many more examples in this one. So if I look at this one, 65 and 110, those are same side interior angles if we focus on these lines and this transversal. So 65 plus 110, those do not add to 180. So even though they're same side interior, again, not supplementary, so lines N and O are not parallel. So I know that by looking at both sets of lines and the transversal. The other option is now if I were to look at this sideways here, and I compare lines M and L, and I look at this right here as a transversal line O, so imagine looking at it sideways. Now I would be comparing these two angles, which happen to add to 180. So that tells me that lines L and M are parallel because of supplementary same side interior angles. Oops, same side interior angles, kind of combine my last word there, implies parallel lines. And then the last set to check here would be these two yellow L and M if I make this my transversal. So again, looking at it sideways, would lines L and M be parallel if N was the transversal? And really, it should work because I'm already saying that they're parallel from the previous problem. So 115 plus 65, it works. They add to 180. So basically, we checked our different scenarios. And you could say, you know, using either the 70 and the 110, you could also say these add to 180, and they better both work because otherwise you wouldn't have, they wouldn't truly be parallel if it didn't work for both sets of transversals. So in that situation, only those, not N and O, because those angles do not, N and O are not parallel because those angles were not supplementary, even though they were same side interior. So now if I look at the next scenario here, here's my transversal that I'm looking at. I have two different scenarios. I have this ray with this ray. So I could say, okay, well, here's my two lines, here's my transversal. When I look at those, I would be comparing the 69 and the 68. Those are corresponding angles, but they're not congruent. So since they're not congruent, that means that those lines or rays are not parallel. So then if I compare this to the next set of lines here, rays, so if I look at these, and this is my transversal, well, now if I compare this entire angle, so that entire angle, 69 plus 31, that's 100. So if I compare that to this entire angle here, 68 plus 32, well, now I have 100, so now I have corresponding angles that are congruent, which would mean J and N have to be parallel. And this is because congruent corresponding angles implies parallel lines. And really, I mean, the other option is you could look at J parallel with M, but I mean, you can tell that those aren't going to have, so it'd be basically comparing 100 with 68, not congruent corresponding angles. So the only pair that would work would be J and N. So that's what you're going to be going through. You're really just looking for, do you have two lines cut by a transversal, and can you find a pair of supplementary or congruent angles based on the type, and that would prove the parallel lines. So go ahead and write some key ideas down and try the check your understanding problems, and we will talk about those in class tomorrow.